Here's something nobody tells you about even the terrible. He started out good. Not just tolerable, not just functional, actually genuinely good. The kind of ruler that historians quietly wish had a different second half to his story. He reformed the legal system. He modernized the military. He conquered territories that had humiliated Russia for generations. His people celebrated him. His advisors respected him. For about 15 years, Ivan IV looked like exactly the kind of Tsar Russia had been waiting for. And then something happened. Something that didn't just change him, it flipped him entirely. Like turning a coin over and discovering the other side is almost unrecognizable. By the end of his reign, Ivan had terrorized his own kingdom into near ruin, murdered thousands of his own people, and, in a single moment that he would never recover from, killed his own son with his own hands. The question that keeps historians up at night isn't whether Ivan was terrible, it's why. Why does a capable, intelligent, even visionary ruler become the single greatest threat to everything he spent his life building? The answer starts much earlier than most people realize. It starts before the crown, before the conquests, before any of the bloodshed. It starts with a boy, alone, in a palace full of people who wanted him dead. Ivan's father, Grand Prince Vasily III, died in 1533 from an infected leg wound. Ivan was 3 years old. His mother, Elena Glinskaya, stepped in as regent and held things together. Barely, but she held them. 5 years later, she was gone too. The official story was illness. Ivan never believed it, and honestly, the circumstances were suspicious enough that modern researchers have gone back and tested her remains. They found unusually high concentrations of poison markers in her hair and bones. Whether it was deliberate or accidental, we still cannot say for certain. But 8-year-old Ivan didn't need a laboratory. He looked around at the men now swarming the Kremlin with barely concealed excitement, and he drew his own conclusions. What happened next was one of the most formative and most brutal political educations in recorded history. The Shuisky family moved in. They were the most powerful of Russia's boyar clans, the ancient noble families who had always resented strong centralized rule. With a child on the throne and nobody left to protect him, they helped themselves to the treasury, to government appointments, to the palace itself. Ivan wrote about this period decades later, and those letters are extraordinary documents, not because of their historical detail, but because of the rawness of the emotion still bleeding through every line. He described how boyar officials would barge into his private chambers at any hour, unannounced, treating his space as though it were their own hallway. How they sat on his dead father's furniture with their boots on. How he and his brother were sometimes left without adequate food or proper clothing, while the men running his kingdom redirected state wealth into their own pockets. He wasn't just being neglected. He was being shown, deliberately, repeatedly, that he was powerless, that the throne beneath him meant nothing, that the people who bowed to him in public viewed him, in private, as a minor inconvenience standing between them and everything they wanted. Now here is where Ivan's story takes its first unexpected turn, because this experience didn't break him, it built him. It built a radar. Ivan developed an almost preternatural ability to read people, to look past what someone was saying and identify what they actually wanted, to notice the flicker of calculation behind a smile, to feel the shift in a room's energy when someone's loyalty had quietly changed sides. He catalogued everything, every slight, every false gesture, every face that looked through him as though he wasn't there. He became extraordinarily good at surviving. The tragedy is that survival and trust are fundamentally incompatible skills, and Ivan would spend the rest of his life unable to turn that survival instinct off, even when it was the very last thing he needed. In 1547, Ivan was crowned. He was 16 years old, and his very first act told you everything about who he intended to be. He refused the traditional title. Every ruler before him had been Grand Prince of Moscow. Ivan looked at that title, decided it wasn't big enough, and declared himself Tsar, a word deliberately chosen to echo Caesar, to claim a lineage of absolute power that stretched all the way back to Rome itself. Before he had won a single battle or passed a single law, he was telling the world that Russia was no longer a collection of principalities scratching at each other's borders. It was an empire, audacious, possibly delusional, as it turned out, completely serious. What followed was 15 years of governance that historians have a complicated relationship with, because it disrupts the clean narrative of Ivan as a monster. He assembled a council of genuinely talented advisors, most notably Alexei Adashev, a man of modest birth who became Ivan's closest collaborator, and the priest Sylvester, whose moral influence over the young Tsar was quietly profound. Together, they built something remarkable. He overhauled the legal code. He restructured local government in ways that actually reduced corruption at the regional level. He reorganized the military from a feudal scramble of competing noble obligations into something approaching a professional fighting force. Disciplined, better equipped, loyal to the state rather than to individual families. He brought a printing press to Russia. He called representative assemblies that gave voices to people who had never had one before. These were not small things. These were the actions of someone who understood governance, who thought carefully about institutions, who was building something meant to last beyond his own lifetime. And then in 1552, he did something that made all of it feel almost secondary by comparison. He personally led his armies to Kazan. Kazan was the capital of a Mongol successor state that had been raiding Russian territory for generations, taking slaves, exacting tribute, treating Russia's eastern borderlands like a hunting ground. Previous rulers had been managing the threat rather than solving it, finding ways to contain it, pay it off, work around it. Ivan decided to end it. The campaign required sophisticated engineering, precise artillery positioning, coordinated troop movements across difficult terrain. Not the kind of operation a young ruler with limited battlefield experience should have been able to pull off. The siege lasted weeks and demanded technical knowledge and strategic patience that Ivan simply was not expected to have. He pulled it off. When Kazan fell, Russia celebrated like it hadn't in decades. Ivan rode back to Moscow a hero, a liberator. He was 22 years old, and he had just done what his predecessors could not manage in generations of trying. This is the Ivan that history tends to skip over. The reformer, the conqueror, the young Tsar with a genuine track record that suggested real greatness was still ahead of him. If his story had ended somewhere around here, we would be calling him something very different. There would be no terrible, just even the great, perhaps, joining the small and carefully guarded club of rulers who actually delivered on their early promise. But then Anastasia got sick. You have to understand what Anastasia meant to Ivan before you can understand what her death did to him. She was chosen as his wife in 1547 through a formal gathering of eligible young women from noble families across Russia. She came from the Romanov family, respected, well-positioned, but not yet the dynasty that would eventually replace Ivan's own bloodline on the Russian throne. What is remarkable isn't that Ivan chose her, it's what happened after. Ivan was not by nature a man who let people in. His childhood had been a masterclass in why that was dangerous. But with Anastasia, something was different. Witnesses consistently described her as having an unusual steadiness, not the political shrewdness you would expect someone to need when living in close proximity to a man like Ivan, but something simpler and rarer than that. She seemed to genuinely care about him, not the Tsar, not the power behind the title, even himself. When his moods darkened, and they darkened often, in ways that would only grow more severe as he aged, she was one of the very few people who could reach him. His advisors noted that certain decisions, certain acts of clemency and restraint, happened specifically because Anastasia was present, that her influence operated quietly but consistently in the direction of the better version of him, the version that was still capable of reform, of generosity, of something resembling grace. She wasn't a political figure. She was something more valuable to Ivan than any advisor or general could ever be. She was proof that someone could know him, actually know him, not the performance of him, not the Tsar, but the man underneath the Tsar, and still choose to stay. She died in August 1560. She was around 25 years old. The cause was listed as illness, but modern forensic analysis of her remains found evidence consistent with heavy metal poisoning. Not conclusively enough to close the debate, but enough to make you pause. What is not debatable is what happened to Ivan in the weeks and months that followed. Within weeks, his two most trusted advisors were dismissed and disgraced. Within months, the collaborative, council-based style of governance he had practiced for over a decade was finished. The chosen council dissolved. The era of reform closed like a door being quietly, permanently locked from the inside. And Ivan began to look at everyone around him the same way he had looked at the boyars in 1538, like enemies, like people who were simply waiting for the right moment. The difference was that in 1538, he was a powerless child with nowhere to go. Now he was the Tsar of all Russia, and this time he intended to do something about it. Something had been building in Ivan for years before it finally broke open. A pressure that no military victory, no act of governance, no amount of prayer seemed able to relieve. Anastasia's death had not created the fear. It had simply removed the one thing that had been keeping it at bay. By the mid-1560s, Ivan had become convinced, not as a political strategy, but as a genuine, visceral belief, that he was surrounded by traitors, that the Boyar families were conspiring against him the way they had conspired against his mother, that the men sitting in his councils were performing loyalty while quietly working toward his destruction. Every unexplained event, every setback, every death became evidence of the same vast plot. And so he made a decision. One winter morning, with no public announcement and no formal explanation, Ivan loaded up his treasury, his personal guards, his most trusted household members, and left Moscow. Not for a campaign, not for a diplomatic visit. He simply left, riding out of the capital in the dead of cold to a fortified village called Alexandrova Sloboda. Then, from there, he sent back 2 letters. The first was addressed to the church hierarchy and the Boyar Council. It was long, detailed and furious, a comprehensive accounting of every grievance Ivan had accumulated, going back decades. Corruption, betrayal, deliberate obstruction of his authority. He was done, he wrote. He was stepping away from power entirely. The second letter was addressed to the common people of Moscow, and here the tone shifted completely. It was almost warm, reassuring. He wanted them to know that his anger was not with them. He bore no grievance toward ordinary Russians. His quarrel, he said, was only with the powerful men who had spent generations robbing the kingdom from the inside. Read both letters together, and the calculation becomes visible beneath the apparent breakdown. He was not actually leaving. He was engineering a crisis. He was forcing an entire population, people whose daily safety and livelihoods depended entirely on the functioning authority of the Tsar, to publicly beg him to return. And simultaneously, he was drawing a clean line in people's minds between himself and the nobility, positioning himself as the protector of ordinary Russians against the elite that had circled him since boyhood. It worked exactly as he intended. Church leaders and senior boyars made the cold journey to Alexandrova Sloboda. They arrived, and they knelt. They asked him to come back. He agreed, on his conditions. He divided Russia into two zones. The Zemshchina, the regular state, would continue operating through existing structures and institutions as it always had. But a second zone, carved from the most strategically valuable parts of the kingdom, would become his personal domain. He called it the Oprichnina. Within it, there were no courts to appeal to, no noble privileges he wasn't personally willing to honor on a given day. His word was the only authority that existed, and to enforce this new order he created something Russia had never encountered before. He called them the Oprichniki. Everything about them was engineered for psychological impact. Black robes, black horses, a severed dog's head and a broom tied to every saddle, to sniff out treason and sweep it away. They answered to no law, no court, no noble family, no church authority. They answered only to Ivan. What followed was 7 years of violence that historians still struggle to categorize. It was not quite civil war. It was not quite a modern purge. It was something more intimate than either. A sustained machinery of terror that followed no consistent logic, except the escalating paranoia of one man who had decided that fear was the same thing as safety. The Oprichniki descended on estates and took everything. They extracted confessions through torture from men who had done nothing, and those confessions named others, who named others still. Accusation fed accusation. The machine became self-sustaining. Ivan was sometimes present at the executions. Witnesses described him as intensely engaged, as though searching these moments for some confirmation, some relief that never quite arrived. And here is the detail that makes Ivan genuinely impossible to reduce to a simple story about cruelty. He maintained careful running lists of everyone he had killed and sent them to monasteries across Russia, paying for prayers to be said over each soul. He believed in God with what appears to have been total sincerity. He believed in judgment. He believed he would answer for every name on those lists, and he kept adding to them anyway. That is the thing that sets Ivan apart from rulers who were simply brutal. He was not a man who had stopped caring whether what he was doing was wrong. He was a man who knew with absolute clarity that it was wrong, confessed it, prayed over it, documented it, and could not stop. Because the fear underneath everything was louder than conscience, louder than faith, louder than the growing evidence that the machine he had built to protect himself was consuming the very thing it was supposed to protect. If you want to understand what Ivan's paranoia cost Russia in concrete, irreversible terms, look at what happened to Novgorod in the winter of 1570. Novgorod was not a minor settlement. It was one of Russia's oldest and most economically significant cities, a major trading hub with deep ties to European markets, centuries of civic history, and a proud tradition of independence that had always given it a character somewhat distinct from Moscow. That independence was precisely what made it feel dangerous to Ivan. Word reached him, through channels that historians now believe were deliberately falsified, that Novgorod was planning to defect to Poland-Lithuania, Russia's primary rival, to simply hand itself over, along with all its strategic value, to the enemy. The intelligence was almost certainly manufactured within the Oprichniki itself, by men who had learned that Ivan's paranoia was a resource, accuse a city of treason, and everything that city owns suddenly becomes available to those who made the accusation. Ivan believed it, or perhaps he needed to believe it. The distinction by this point in his life had become dangerously thin. He marched in December 1569. He brought the full force of the Oprichniki with him. What happened over the following 5 weeks resists clean summary. The city was looted systematically. Residents were arrested in numbers that made individual accountability meaningless. Torture was applied on a scale that spoke not of intelligence gathering, but of something else. Something that served no purpose except to demonstrate that there were no limits. Thousands died. The historical estimates vary enough to suggest that the chaos of the event itself made accurate counting impossible. Ivan set up a throne on the riverbank and presided over all of it. The archbishop was arrested on charges that barely held together under examination. Merchants who had maintained loyal trade relationships with Moscow for decades lost everything they had spent their lives building. The city's famous markets were stripped bare. Its institutions were dismantled piece by piece. Novgorod never recovered, not to anything resembling what it had been. By 1572, Ivan disbanded the Oprichnina. He banned the word from being spoken. He began prosecuting former Oprichniki leaders for crimes they had committed in his name. He had finally seen the mechanism clearly, seen how his own fear had been harvested, how the system he built to protect himself had been the primary instrument of his manipulation. He understood, at last, what had actually been happening. But the understanding came at the cost of everything it took to reach it, and some cost cannot be recovered. November 1581. Ivan's eldest son, also named Ivan, 27 years old, experienced in military affairs, respected at court, is by every measure the man his father has been preparing to leave Russia to. He is capable. He is ready. He is, in the most practical sense, Russia's future. Father and son argue. The exact cause shifts depending on which account you read. Some sources say Ivan struck his daughter-in-law in a rage over something as specific as her clothing, and his son intervened. Others describe a heated disagreement over military strategy. The specifics may not matter as much as what they reveal, that by this stage of Ivan's life, the trigger was almost never really the point. The explosion had been building long before the argument began. Ivan raised his iron-tipped staff. The blow landed on his son's temple. Ivan Ivanovich died 3 days later. The papal envoy Antonio Posavino was in Moscow at the time and documented what followed. What he describes is not a man indifferent to what he has done. It is not a ruler already calculating the political consequences of a broken succession. What Posavino witnessed was a man coming entirely apart at the seams. Ivan collapsed over his son's body and could not be moved from it. He screamed his son's name until those in the room said it was unbearable to be near. He tore at his own hair. He beat himself against the floor. In the weeks that followed, he barely ate. He wandered the corridors of the palace at night, calling out as though he expected an answer. He sent donations to monasteries and wrote the instructions himself. "Pray for my son. Pray for me." He identified himself in the written requests, plainly and without evasion, as the murderer. The Russian painter Ilya Repin captured this moment in an 1885 painting. Even the Terrible and his son Ivan, 3 centuries after it happened. The father cradling the dying son, one hand pressed to the wound, his face broken open in a way that has no tidy name. People who stand in front of that painting often remark that it does not look like a depiction of a monster. It looks like a depiction of a man who has finally completely understood what he is. The horror is not in the blood. It is entirely in the recognition. Ivan had spent his entire reign constructing defenses against betrayal, against loss, against the feeling that had lived in him since he was 8 years old and alone in a palace where no one was protecting him. He had made himself the most feared man in the largest country on earth, and somewhere underneath all of that he had believed, must have believed, that enough fear, enough control, enough walls between himself and the world would eventually make him safe. And with his own hands, in one uncontrolled moment, he had destroyed the one thing that could never be rebuilt. He had not been destroyed by a boyar with poison, not by a foreign king with an army at the border, by himself, by the rage that had lived in him since childhood, that he had never truly examined, never learned to govern, because everything in his life had rewarded it, and nothing had ever taught him another way. He was his own worst enemy. He always had been. It just took him until this moment to see it without any remaining room for doubt. Ivan died in March 1584. He was 53 years old and looked considerably older. His hair gone, his body worn through, the extraordinary energy that had once driven him across battlefields and through decades of political warfare completely spent. He died mid-game. There was a chess set on the table in front of him, pieces still arranged in the middle of a match, a move waiting to be made that never was. For a man who spent his entire life calculating, reading threats, anticipating betrayals, trying always to stay one step ahead of whatever was coming next, there is something quietly devastating about that image. The board unfinished, the position unresolved, the game simply stopping because the player ran out of time. The Russia he left behind was in serious trouble. The Oprichnina years had fractured entire regional economies. Novgorod had never returned to what it had been. The Livonian War, a 25-year campaign for access to the Baltic Sea, had ended in failure after consuming enormous resources and achieving almost nothing. The administrative class had been so thoroughly purged and terrorized over decades that there was barely a competent governing structure left to hold things together. His eldest son was dead. His remaining son Fyodor was deeply pious and completely unsuited for the demands of power. The succession was fragile in every direction at once. Within 15 years of Ivan's death, Russia descended into what historians call the Time of Troubles, a collapse so total it included famine, civil war, multiple competing claimants to the throne, and ultimately Polish soldiers occupying the Kremlin itself. The empire Ivan had given his life to building, defending, and inadvertently weakening came apart almost the moment his grip on it finally loosened. He had not made Russia safe. He had spent his reign making it more vulnerable, through the exact methods he had convinced himself were making it strong, and yet it would be too easy, and honestly not quite honest, to close his story there. Ivan Grozny. That is what his people called him. Grozny does not actually translate to terrible in the way English speakers use that word. It means something closer to formidable, fearsome, the kind of word you might reach for when describing a storm or a force of nature. Not something simply evil, but something vast and uncontrollable and indiscriminate in what it leaves behind. His contemporaries were not calling him a monster. They were acknowledging something true about his scale. Because Ivan was not only the darkness, he was also the young Tsar who rode to Kazan at 22 and came home a liberator. He was the ruler who built legal institutions that outlasted him by centuries. He was a serious theologian, a composer of religious music, a man who read voraciously and thought carefully and prayed with what appears to have been completely genuine devotion. He was the man who loved Anastasia with a depth that, when it was taken from him, left something permanently exposed that he spent the rest of his life trying to wall off. He was all of those things, and he was also the thing that destroyed all of those things. The wound the Boyars left in him in 1538 never closed. He carried it the entire length of his life, and everything it touched. Every relationship, every institution, every person who got close enough, eventually showed the damage. Not because he was uniquely evil, but because the belief he had formed as a terrified child, that safety was impossible, that trust was a trap, that the only way to survive was to destroy threats before they destroyed you, never loosened its grip, even when he had more than enough power and intelligence to question it. He thought the danger was always outside him. He spent his whole life fighting outward, building walls, removing threats, constructing elaborate systems of control around a fear that lived at the very center of him. And the one enemy he never found a way to face directly was the one that had been there since the beginning. The part of him that was still 8 years old and frightened, making decisions from that fear in the body of the most powerful man in Russia. That, in the end, is what made him so completely his own worst enemy. There is a quieter kind of sadness that comes from sitting with Ivan's story long enough. Not sympathy exactly, not after everything, but something more like recognition. A reminder that the most destructive thing a person can carry through a life is not cruelty, not ambition, not even greed. It is an old wound that was never allowed to heal, given just enough power to reach everything around it. Most of us will never hold the kind of power Ivan held. Most of us will never do the damage that he did. But the fear that drove him, that low, persistent current underneath everything, whispering that the world is still dangerous, that people cannot truly be trusted, that letting your guard down means losing everything. That feeling is not as foreign as we might prefer to believe. We all carry some version of 1538, a moment or a season or a year that taught us something about the world that we never quite unlearned. And most of the time, we manage. We find our Anastasias. We build something good alongside the fear rather than instead of it. Ivan never quite managed that, and Russia paid the price for it, for generations. So let that be the thought that carries you into tonight, not Ivan's darkness, but the gentler question it leaves behind. What old story are you still governing from? What fear learned long ago is still making decisions that the person you are now might choose differently? There is no rush to answer. Some questions are best left to settle slowly, in the quiet while you sleep. Good night.